Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Caroline Hernandez, and I am at the Energy Resources Center at the University of Illinois, Chicago. The Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group provides a forum for information exchange and development of best management practices that promote habitat on working landscapes, such as utilities and transportation rights of way. And as we get going on this webinar, we are going to be recording it, and you can find that recording on our website, which is on the next slide, where we also post relevant news, best management practices, planning tools, and other resources in addition to upcoming events, the latest vegetation management resources and case studies. In a week or so, just click one more, there will also be a link to the recording of this webinar along with all past recordings of other webinars in that resources and projects page. For logistics today, everyone is on mute except for myself and the presenters. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat box in GoToWebinar and we will respond as quickly as possible. And if you have any questions for the presenters, which we encourage related to the content of today's webinar, type those into the chat box as well. And we've built in some time at the end of the webinar for questions. So just please submit them on a rolling basis as they occur to you. We'll keep track of them. And then again, we will be posting the recording of this webinar to our website and in a week or so, and you can rewatch it and share with friends as you see fit. Okay, next slide. So with that, I'd like to turn to our topic today. We are excited to have experts in pipelines and sustainable vegetation management join us. First, Dave Murk, Director of Pipelines at the American Petroleum Institute, will introduce the newly developed conservation guidelines for oil and gas right-of-way management. Then Scott Sharpe will discuss the first steps to sustainable right-of-way management with a case study from Marathon Petroleum and Gas. And then Donnie Garrison, the Advocacy and Engagement Specialist for Shell Midstream US, will share a case study of Shell's conservation. We will have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. So please, again, submit them during the webinar in that chat box, and I'm going to ask Dave to get started for us. Thank you. We can't hear you yet. There we go. Try again.
Great, that works. All right. Thanks, Caroline. Really appreciate it. And I want to thank both Iris and Caroline for the opportunity to talk with you all today on something that, you know, from an API standpoint, we're really excited about, not only within API and our midstream group, but also as an industry around conservation programs. And I want to thank Iris and Caroline for hosting the webinar today. I think you're going to find the information interesting, and hopefully, you know, our goal is to really bring some excitement around conservations on pipeline right-of-ways, and really you'll hear with the case studies, you're going to hear how you can practically put it to work. So as I mentioned, Donnie, Scott, and I are gonna tag team today. I'm going to start and provide just a little bit of background, as Caroline mentioned, on API's conservation program, the goals, objectives, where it's heading, and then I think the part you want to hear is from the operators themselves, from Scott and Donnie, are going to touch on how they've actually implemented a conservation on right-of-ways, which should be interesting. Next slide. So as we started to look at a conservation program for our industry within midstream and for pipeline operators, we really started to look at what are the drivers behind a conservation type program. You know, our industry over the last couple of decades really has gone through a lot of change. Clearly change from the fact that we've become a significant energy producer, but also for our industry, it's really been, how do we talk about what we're doing and communicate what we're doing, which we've been doing for years on the environmental and sustainability front. And what are the drivers in today's world for us as an industry driving that change? You know, for years as an industry, you know, even though we were focusing in on environmental stewardship, you know, we kept our head down in a lot of ways and stayed under the radar. But clearly, with the growing conscious around climate and the importance of the environment and sustainability, you know, we couldn't really do that as an industry, and it was important for us. And there was a recognition on the part of our industry that we really need to communicate what we're doing. We need to do more in this space, and we need to do more engagement around environmental stewardship, and in this case, conservation. So I've got the list up. These are just some of the things I've touched on, but really these were the driving force behind us moving forward in conservation. But we're working on a variety of climate initiatives underneath the API Climate Action Framework. So next slide. So again, as I mentioned, from an industry standpoint, our leadership back in 2021, as we were talking through sustainability initiatives, the idea came up about conservation. We have, you know, hundreds of thousands of miles of right-of-way, pipeline right-of-way, and if you include distribution, it's over 2.7 million miles of rights-of-way related to and connected to pipelines. And, you know, great opportunities and in a lot of areas for us to do have a positive impact on the environment, working with communities. And so we embarked a year ago in March on an effort with member companies to create guidelines, to create a program around conservation, and that included guidelines. We had 10 member companies part of that group. Scott and Donnie are both a part of that task force that worked on the guidelines. And really, again, for us as an industry to produce a set of guidelines and a program that no matter what phase of this type of work you're in, the guidelines could be used. And really the beauty of the guidelines is they're scalable and flexible. You're going to have some operators that probably aren't doing much in this area on pipeline right-of-ways, doing more mowing, then doing habitat management. Then you have, as the two gentlemen are going to hear about here shortly on the case studies, you have companies that are have been a little more forward-leaning in this area. So the guidelines, being scalable and flexible, really provide an opportunity, no matter what maturity level you're at with conservation. It allows you to use that program. The guidelines were published in February of this past year, and I'll touch on some of the next steps here shortly and how we're implementing the program. Next slide. So the guidelines themselves really are focused and founded around the concept of plan, do, check, and adjust, or plan, do, check, act. Some of you might have heard that before. But really with a lot of the programs and the standards that API produces, we're really focused on that kind of model where you start with planning, you put a program in place, you execute, then you evaluate. The evaluation piece is an important part and will be an important part of our conservation program as well, whether that's looking at biodiversity, whether that's looking at pollinator counts, what have you. That'll be an important part, and we'll adjust the program accordingly, and we'll adjust the guidelines accordingly. The guidelines are really made up of these four areas. The preamble is focused on what you would expect. It's kind of to put out the purpose of the guidelines, the value and benefits of it, but also the key part of it, and I'll talk about here shortly, are principles. We've established and based the guidelines and the program on 5 key principles, which I'll talk about shortly. And then the main content of the guidelines are really to provide a process to help operators walk through how they would get started, what things they need to consider. It's a lot of questions, right? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And whatever phase of development, of whether that's planning, building the business case, assessing, evaluating, or implementing. And then the conclusion, and then really, I think probably the 2 most important parts of the guidelines are clearly the main content of the guidelines, but also the appendices. And really, we worked hard as we were developing the guidelines to create resources and tools that could be linked to, or that operators would have access to as they were developing their program. Next slide. As I mentioned, the guidelines themselves and the program are really founded on these 5 principles. The first 2, as you would expect, kind of inherent in anything that we do as an industry. The importance of respect and integrity really drives trust, and trust is incredibly important for our industry, and in an industry that sometimes is not seen favorably, and the trust factor is an incredibly important part. And then the other 2 that I think I wanted to hit on, and I'll talk about a little bit more, is really the engagement and the being responsive to community concerns. I mean, those 2 principles themselves, it's not only about listening to concerns, understanding concerns, that's incredibly important, but it's also about, as we're developing programs on right-of-ways around habitat, how can we make it better for the community? How can we partner with the communities to build something that is not only beneficial to operators, but it's also beneficial to the communities? And that can be anything from bike paths to habitats that local groups like Boy Scouts and local communities can use for nature fairs and science trips and things like that. And so it's really an important piece of this, and we're really as we were building the guidelines, as I said, that was a critical important part. And then the other part of it is engaging with our regulator. Honestly, we have that aspect of this as well. So next slide. So I'm not going to hit on each of these, but these are really the main objectives for the program itself. And I'll touch on a few. I mean, for us, this is an opportunity to be forward-leaning in an area that just honestly makes sense. And with all the right-of-ways that we have, not only pipeline right-of-ways, but also pipeline facilities, and that we have operators that are also interested in doing these types of programs on their tank farms, where they have acres surrounding their tank farms, and there's opportunities there to utilize that space. I think the other important part is, what we've developed is an industry-wide program. We have a lot of operators, as you'll hear from Scott and Donnie, who have already done and implemented programs, or are in the process of implementing programs. And but from an industry standpoint, we really never had anything that we could talk about in this area broadly across the industry. And so having a program like what API's created, it will provide that opportunity to really be able to talk about this type of work on an industry-wide basis versus an individual basis. And we see this, again, evolving over time as far as whether we're going to have to make adjustments to the program. There'll be lessons learned as we're doing this, but working hand in hand with our pipeline operators, as well as the partnership we have. We have a current partnership with Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, and we're looking to partner with other NGOs. We'll learn and evolve the program. Next slide. Really, for the program itself, and we're in the process of working with a lot of operators. Actually have expressed a lot of interest, and we have probably 6 right now that are active and moving forward with the program, with others to come. And so what we've set out are these 5 steps to the program to get started. We have some associated forms to go with it to help operators kind of get started, and it's really the intake, then a site visit, developing the program plan, and then implementation of the approach for implementation. Whether that's you're doing IVM, you're doing habitat management, you're doing species specific, and then what type of approach you're taking within that respect. And then it'll be multiple. We're not expecting, you'll probably have a combination of mowing and herbicide use, etc. So it's developing that plan and then kicking it off. An important part, as I mentioned, is the engagement with the communities as part of the planning process, as well as with PHMSA, our Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, who's our regulator. And really in step 2 and 3 is when that engagement would start to happen with the community as you start to build out your plan and what the program would look like. It'll be important for operators to engage at that point with those communities and stakeholders. Next slide. So with opportunity like this comes some challenges, clearly. You know, this is just a list of some of those areas that, as we were developing the program, 2, as operators internally try to get commitment from leadership, which is an incredibly important aspect of this program, is getting that leadership, and making that case, that business and social case, it will be important. And so there's, you know, as we're rolling this out to an industry, in some cases mature, in some areas not, you know, it can be challenging to get people who traditionally focused on keeping right-of-ways maintained by mowing to think outside the box and to think a little differently. And so those are the kinds of challenges, and that's you know, across the organization. So these are just some challenges as we were developing the program that that we've been working through. Next slide. And I think this is the last slide I have, and I'll close on this. From a timeline standpoint, we rolled out the guidelines, as I mentioned, in February. We announced our partnership with Pheasants Forever in March. And now we're in that company piloting phase of the program, which really started in earnest probably in May, and we're working with operators. The other piece that I don't have slides on, but I would say is another area that we're really focused on through our regions. We have region directors, is working with states. There's a lot of funding that goes unutilized within states throughout the country, honestly, in conservation, that in some cases are targeted toward our industry, in some cases are broader, but there's opportunities there as well to partner with states. And we actually, in the Midwest, in a half dozen or more states, we've been closely engaged in talking with states on utilizing of some of those funds through NGOs to support this type of partnership with pipeline operators. So opportunity there as well, and that'll just expand as we continue to expand the program nationwide. I think that's my last slide. We go next. So any questions, happy to answer after Scott and Donnie go. So Robin Rourke and I are the 2 that are leading this. Robin's our VP of Midstream. So between the 2 of us, happy to respond to any emails or questions, get you involved, get your understanding of the program. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott.
Thanks, Dave. Good afternoon. I'm Scott Sharpe with Marathon Pipeline. I'm an environmental professional. Just want to talk briefly today, kind of an overview of our program that we've established. I'll start saying that there is a significant conservation opportunity on our rights-of-way and stations. As Dave mentioned earlier, the amount of acres or miles of line is significant. And when we look at landscapes that have been lost, whether that's early successional habitat or prairie habitats, there's an opportunity for us to help in the restoration of those, to providing habitat for sensitive species. And obviously that's part of why Monarch CCAA and the Habitat Working Group got formed initially. But all that to say, there is opportunity here. I think that just a little background on Marathon Pipeline for you guys who are unfamiliar. We're a midstream company that operates about 10,000 miles of pipe. And so when that's extrapolated, that's close to 60,000 acres. And so as a land manager, I think about the opportunity that is there, and that's very exciting. That's a huge landscape, though linear in nature, a huge landscape to have an impact on. So before we move on to the next slide here, I will kind of brag on this picture. This is our first project that took place with Marathon Pipeline. It is at our Lima station, and it was a pollinator planting that we did about a year and a half ago now. It's a 30-acre parcel. As you can see, it is the ideal flowers and butterflies that we talk about as a result of some of this landscape. Obviously, as we make other management decisions, not all of them look this way, but just wanted to show that it's kind of our first project that we had going. Initially, I do want to start with some definitions as I get going. You're going to hear some things with integrated vegetation management, integrated habitat management, as well as sustainable landscapes. So as Marathon Pipeline got going on this initiative about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, part of the challenge was just understanding what we were talking about. So integrated vegetation management, or IVM, has been part of the energy landscape for almost 20 years. In some places researched back to 70 years, but within the pipeline industry, it has not been a topic that's been discussed. So first, the first challenge is talking about IVM and how does that correlate with IHM and how does that fall under sustainable landscapes. And so I just wanted to start kind of with our own internal definitions of those so that you guys know as I talk IVM, IHM, kind of what I'm talking about. Our sustainable landscape is just our holistic approach to right-of-ways, to fee parcels, lands we own, as well as just like partnerships that maybe exist with Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, any conservation organization, what that would look like. They could all fall under our sustainable landscapes, as well as just opportunities we have in joint ventures, those types of things. Our integrated vegetation management, as you'll see the picture here, it includes our actual management of the vegetation. So we're focusing on promoting that compatible desired vegetation through a number of ways. And this graphic shows it well. Historically, Marathon Pipeline has had a robust mowing program that has been the industry standard. We have mowed 5,000 miles of pipe a year for a long time, and that was well built out, well established. And so though it provided us with some regulatory compliance and what we thought was a best practice, we're coming to realize that may not necessarily be the case, knowing that it's still part of a tool in the toolbox. The other parts of that would be select herbicide use, going after those, the woody uncompatible vegetation, enhanced planting. So as we get right-of-ways in different stages and we want to promote vegetation that works for us, and those are the types of things that we're looking at. And then I want to talk a little bit about IHM and how that's different. When we talk about IHM, it's using that vegetation for a purpose. So, initially we're managing vegetation. On the second part of that is managing it with a purpose. So now not only are we making that vegetation work for us, but we're making it work for us for a reason, not just a cost savings opportunity, or not just, sometimes protect pipe, but also connecting these linear corridors of habitats to protect invertebrates, ground nesting birds, those types of things that maybe we didn't see before. So just a couple of definitions there as I talk IVM, IHM, sustainable landscapes. They're kind of all connected within our program. Next slide. I think as we talk about why we are doing this, as you're starting a program, it's important to start with the why. So as part of Marathon, as that part of MPL's 6 goals, 3 of them are here listed. 1, 0 mainline releases. As a pipeline company, that is our number 1 priority, is safe and reliably operate our pipeline. So as we talk about how does this fit here, our vegetation that's over top of our pipe is so important for 0 mainline releases. So we want that pipe to be protected from woody vegetation. We want the soil to be stable as a result of deeply rooted systems. We want to be able to visually inspect to make sure that we don't have any releases. If there's any vegetation, we want to see it, that it's impacted earlier than later. So that's obviously the number 1 goal for us. Secondly, it's aligned with and strengthen our ESG strategy. As we talk about how IVM, IHM kind of correlates with environment and biodiversity, there's a significant opportunity there. And so as we look at managing differently, the amount of species that are present on our right-of-ways, both, flora, fauna, invertebrates, birds, those are all positively impacted. And the third opportunity for us in the why is to protect the public and earn their trust. Marathon Pipeline has 29,000 landowners across our systems in 28 states. And so we want to engage with those landowners. And our goal is for us to understand their, use, things that they want to do on their land, whether they're beekeepers, bird watchers, hunters, outdoor enthusiasts. We want to make sure that we engage with them. And if there's a way for us to promote habitat that works for the goals of a landowner, it definitely helps an opportunity of building that relationship and earning their trust. Next slide. So as we started talking about sustainable landscapes, we figured we need a goal. How do we engage with our folks to say there is a goal for us to accomplish by 2025? To be honest, the goal initially was set a little farther out, and we were challenged to say, hey, this is a good thing, this is the right thing to do. Let's see if we can be a little more aggressive on it. So the goal for Marathon Pipeline by 2025 is to manage our landscapes, suitable landscapes, in a different way, 50% of them in a different way. So that seems like a significant goal. As you can see, we're about 9.5% of the way there. That's a challenge for us as we face it. And again, you'll see a couple pictures here. Right-of-ways look different. Like here on the left, that's a great example of IBM in place and what a right-of-way could look like. And here we have a station that was an enhanced planning, and definitely another great example of IBM, IHM in work. So as we talk about 50% of compatible right-of-ways, what does that mean, and how do we measure that? If you want to jump to the next slide for me. So when we talk about alternative methods, these are the types of things we're talking about, and these are all parts of that tool chest discussed earlier. So conservation mowing, changing the times, heights, in which we mow. So we know that mechanical method is always going to be part of what we do, but now changing the time we do it to accomplish a different goal or to protect the species. So change our mowing height to higher elevations, change it within the windows established by monarch guidance, as well as Pheasants Forever ground nesting guidance. We want to make sure that we try to fall within those windows of mowing. Select herbicides. We know that mowing of woody vegetation just promotes deeper, more rooted systems, and that is actually opposite of what we're trying to do. And so attacking those in a different way than what we have previously. Enhanced planning. As we see right-of-ways progressing through the system or progressing through the process, we definitely have an opportunity to increase that biodiversity with actually going in and sanding and planting some seeds. And then we talk about alternative agricultural practice. Obviously, soil stability is a significant factor for a pipeline company, and the less erosion we can see over the course of a year, the better it is for us. And so starting to introduce, working with our landowners where we have agricultural crops to say, hey, let's plant some cover crops for the winter, not only to capture nutrients, but to provide soil stability and decrease erosion over time. Go and jump to the next slide for me. So how do we do this? As we show, hey, we have methods. We understand what IVM is. We understand what IHM is. How do we go about even starting to implement it? And that's a challenge that I think we had 2 years ago. I hear a challenge as we get together as a group. Some folks have been doing it for the last 10 years. Other folks are trying to just understand how do we start. And so I just wanted to talk just briefly about what we've identified as 5 steps. It may be a little different for other folks, but I think this is probably included in our API guidance as well. But first, we have to know what's there. So going out and evaluating our existing vegetation. That can be done with a sheet that has plant species compositions already on that sheet. Go out, look and see what is there. It also allows us to engage with our landowners. When we're out there doing vegetation analysis, it allows us to, hey, talk to our landowner. What are you using this land for? Are you grazing it currently? Are you beekeeping on it? Are you hunting it? What does it look like? Secondly, after that evaluation, it allows us to develop implementation plans. So we're going to consider a specific goal for the site. Hey, is this a highly erodible area? Is this area maybe have low depth of cover? Is it adjacent to a park where we want some folks to see that, you know, there's some positive benefits that are going on? Are we looking at carbon sequestration? Are we trying to promote water quality? All of those can be considered in developing that plan, and it kind of fills in as a ranking system. You know, sometimes we know that the vegetation is not going to be great, and the goal is just to keep it at a certain height, and that can be part of the plan as well. So developing that plan would be second. Third is executing with our plan, working with our contractors that we already have in place. A lot of them historically have been mowing contractors to say, hey, we're going to change this process a little bit. Can you guys come alongside us? We used to mow everything. Now we want to change our windows in which we're mowing. We want to change maybe from mowing to spraying a little bit, or hey, this vegetation actually looks great. Let's walk away from it from the year and see how it responds. And then monitoring. Once we execute that plan, let's go back initially kind of in the first year and say, hey, we sprayed that this year. How did it respond? Hey, we eliminated that woody vegetation, that incompatible vegetation, or at least we're trying to. Did it respond the way we thought it was? And then third or fifth, we're going to evaluate long-term success. So as that plan has been implemented, we come back year 3, year 4, year 5. Did it respond the way that we thought it was going to long-term? So I think that's, you know, important, obviously, when we think about evaluate and adjusting on the next cycle. So those are kind of the 5 steps that we've identified. Want to talk just briefly here on a case study. As we were getting going, step 1 for us was to convert a couple of stations at Finley and at Lima, as you saw the picture from earlier. As we started that transition, we were challenged to look at our right-of-ways because it wasn't focused on it at first. And so we took a system, Heath to Finley, which is here in Ohio where I'm sitting, and looked at a small segment of right-of-way. That right-of-way is about 300 feet long, and it had some pretty decent native vegetation on it. It was historically planted. It was on a historical mow cycle every 3 years. And as a result of that 3 years, we just mowed, didn't do a whole lot of evaluation with it. We knew it got mowed on the 3rd year and that it got canopy trimmed on the 6th year. On year 3, myself and another employee were able to go out and look at it and recognize that it could last a couple more years with some very minimal management. And so we took hand pruners and backpack sprayers and went in and just managed the undesirable, incompatible woody vegetation for the most part that was there in the course of an afternoon. And as a result, we were able to take almost 23 miles out of our bid package for the following year, saving us almost $36,000. And so the initial conversation is cost savings. You know, that's how we looked at it from the first get-go. And then we started to go back out there and say, hey, look at the species that are present here. Look at the plant species that are present. Look at the invertebrates that are present. And to see the benefits of that early successional habitat that actually was void as a result of a strong agricultural landscape was really important for us. As I said here, it allowed for us to bid our right-of-way maintenance work differently. And then it allows us to interact with our landowners. As we're out there managing land in this situation, it was, again, by hand, on foot. We were actually able to engage with the landowner, tell him what we were doing and why we were doing it, and say, hey, this right-of-way may look different than it has in the past. We're not going to come in and mow it, but the vegetation that's here is you know, very compatible with the goal of Marathon Pipeline. And so we were able to leave it and engage with them there. So that was kind of our first win on the right-of-way that I wanted to share with you. I think I have one more slide. So we talk about fee parcels, we talk about right-of-ways, and all this needs to be done with the process, evaluations, you know, plan implementations, monitoring, those types of things. And the question is, all right, how are we going to accomplish this? And as Dave had mentioned earlier, API had partnered with Pheasants Forever. Marathon Pipeline also has, in terms of getting those evaluations done. So Pheasants Forever has, you know, the 2nd largest number of biologists across the country outside of government agencies, and they were able to provide us with the resources through a partnership to go out and do those vegetation surveys for us and start to implement those plans. So we're working closely with them from that standpoint, and then they'll actually be able to go out and do our monitoring. And, you know, from my perspective, Pheasants Forever in rural communities is a household name. They're known as the Conservation Habitat Organization. And so for us to work with them, that brings some validity to our program. The second partnership that we've entered into is with the Ohio State Sustainability Institute. And we're working with 3 researchers there to talk about managing our rights of way differently, and the goals, not only our goals, but the outcomes and how those correlate to certain things they're looking at. And so those 3 researchers are focused on 3 specific projects. One is the vegetation on top of the pipe. And so the ecology, how does the change, as we change our management, how does that impact those communities on top? The second is a professor working on soil composition, and he's just looking at soil compaction. How does that, how is it impacted, one, by our vegetation methods, and 2, how does that soil long-term sequester carbon? And then the third is, as we change our management practices, how are our landowners responding differently? So as you can see, we started building this program. We can't do it alone. We recognize that there's other experts out there in the field that have the research, that have the knowledge to help support us. And so we've partnered with them. So that's my last slide. As Dave said, I think we'll have some time for questions at the end. But again, thanks for the opportunity. Turn it over to Donnie.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Thanks everybody for the opportunity to talk today. It's kind of somewhat good going last. You know, we all, you see some really good connections between all of us and what we're working on. I'm going to speak a little bit more today about, you know, not only the projects we have. I have an example of some of our coastal projects we've done, but you'll hear me say about the ways of working and looking at different ways of working and implementing that into our process. So again, appreciate it. So you go to the next slide. We just get into it, talk about it. So we want to talk a little bit about our Shell Midstream operations, our infrastructure, a little bit about our footprint, our current maintenance program, why we do what we do. I'm gonna speak to the coastal projects, and then a little bit more on the API guides. Dave really covered all of that, so I don't want to get too much of that. I did have the honor of being the or still chair for the task force, which has been such a great learning experience for me, and building those relationships and partnerships that Scott has just talked about. And then I'm going to show our current vegetative program that we've done on one of our right-of-ways. I've got some photos on that and just really excited about that, and then finish up on that. So go to the next one, please. So this is a little bit about our infrastructure. We cover over 3,000 miles of pipelines. We operate multiple tank farms throughout several parts of the region. We have a big footprint here in the Gulf of Mexico, where we handle over 70% of all production that's coming through the Gulf comes through one of our pipeline systems. We have over 450 full-time employees supporting those assets. And then again, those assets go through several critical habitat and environmentally sensitive areas throughout the United States. Next slide. So around the pipeline maintenance, Scott had touched on that some. So, you know, we maintain our pipeline systems per state, federal regulations. We maintain to make sure that we have a safe and reliable pipeline system, and that's to protect the people and the environment. So a lot of our activities that we do are based around that. So whether it's mowing the right of ways, as Scott talked about, or actually going out and we having to do internal pipeline inspections that we run these smart tools through, and you have to go and expose that pipe and do an inspection or possibly a repair. That's critical to those operations. one of the things that we deal with is that footprint. Is that footprint of that daily operations of work, and of, you know, how do you go in that area and make sure that that area is just as good as it was when you were there, or even better. I included some photos there to the right, which is actually a pipeline dig in one of our pipeline systems in the along the marsh of the Louisiana Gulf Coast. You see there, this heavy equipment, this big equipment. There's not a lot of different tools out there to do this work. But what we started looking at is how can we be proactive, and when we finish that work, and make sure that area is protected for any future issues. And this is what we used in this location were some things that's called floating islands, which, you know, brought back some native species to that area. It was a really great project that we started this kind of work probably 5 years ago, and now is really part of our routine operations. When we go out to do this work, we plan to do that. This is something that's not required, you know, through the permit process, but we're being proactive, and that's what I see that this work that we're doing is proactive work to not only protect environments, but it ends up protecting our assets also. This is you know, what Scott, you can go to the next one, is great. What Scott had talked about, or Dave also, is around that culture change. We've had these operations for a long time, and if you're doing this work and it's safe and it's reliable, you know, why change it, right? So this is for us as industry, seeing where that change is and seeing those opportunities. I included 2 of our coastal projects to really kind of show where we've grown. I go back. This was the first one. It was an area where we were seeing erosion conditions as we see along the Gulf Coast, and it was really going to possibly affect the pipeline, where we would see top cover taken off of that pipe, and even in some areas there's a washout under the pipe. That could lead to a major project that's, you know, several $1 million, and would also affect a bigger footprint at marsh. So what this project is we went from the traditional ways of going in and doing a bulkhead to looking at how do we include nature-based solutions kind of work. So this was bringing in sediment. This was bringing in native species of plants. So how do we make a living shoreline here to protect that asset in that area? Go to the next one. And you can see it was a before and after picture. It was really amazing. There was a lot of things. One of those kind of things, you do a project and you don't expect to have such a great success in it. Even behind this area, we had a lot of future growth, or growth that came because that continued tidal flow was not coming in, so that sediment came around and really developed it. You know, I have this stuff in really to talk to about a transition of how we've kind of changed and just learned. Again, I talked about this project. I was an operations supervisor for those assets at the time, and it was probably 2012 or so when we were doing this work. And I saw this as an opportunity to try to do this work because we had less people and it was a less footprint. Well, at the time, really, you know, just in my world of Shell, it was around the safety of our employees, safety of the contractors that are doing work. So got less people, less equipment, less chance for an incident. So, you know, the habitat piece was something that came in after, but you know, was also a great plus in that we put together this natural infrastructure that became a living shoreline that supported the local species of fish and oysters, et cetera, in that area. So, and also saw us some costs. You know, this one, we also learned from that. This one costs us a little bit, but compared to, say, having to go do an immediate repair, really paid off. So go to the next, please. This next project was recently completed. This is the area where a pipeline has seen over the years, you know, erosion conditions that had eroded away the bank, and it really just became a flow that also created opportunities for people, you know, maybe fishing, et cetera, that boats were using that channel. So we really needed to do something there to not only protect people and environment, but also protect our asset. So working with a group called Natrix, which has actually been through our Shell Game Changer program, they have a technology that they you know what they always I always apologize to them after, because I don't say the right way or technical. Is really kind of building your rocks. Is taking the right materials, using a system to develop this. And what was fantastic for us when we got together and first talked and saw this opportunity is that this application eliminated a lot of heavy equipment. You can't go do a lot of this work without having equipment. It's just not there. So we went from having barges, multiple people, multiple days, on to weeks of doing projects, to having maybe 3 or 4 people, a small boat, in doing a project in a day versus a week. Just that benefit itself of, again, lessen the risk to the environment, lessen the risk to people, but you also now have that opportunity that you got less equipment that you're being used. So it's a great benefit on that part. When you talk about, you know, having that instilled and having that ownership in your operations and being able to build that maintenance kind of projects that you have to do anyway. But on the other end of that, of turning this into a habitat, this area is rich in oysters. There's oyster fishermen, oyster leases in here. So having this material that can help support and increase oyster growth in this area is you know, the stakeholder engagements, the community piece is just really important. You know, not only with water quality, et cetera, those benefits, but, you know, having an oyster growth. And of course, South Louisiana, boy, I enjoy eating more oysters. So more oysters, I always support that kind of stuff. Next one. This is our first vegetative management project. It's an area here in South Louisiana again. It's a natural wildlife refuge called Biotech National Wildlife Refuge, and this project really came to us, which I joke about. I want to take a lot of credit for coming up with the project, but it really came to us, which was fantastic. I think that shows not only the engagement that we have with our community to know that they can reach out, but also us having a vision to reach out to this area. This area is around 9,000 acre refuge managed by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. This certain section is a pipeline corridor that has several pipelines in this corridor, and really we meant to talk about, you know, what can we do here, and they had a program that they wanted to do, a pollinator program, plant native species of a Cajun wildflower. Bringing back to Cajun prairie here in Louisiana. So it was really exciting for us, a small investment. One of those things for us being able to show too is a proof point. You know, we were looking for those projects that when we talk about a culture change, you know, having to show that it works and having to show that there's an option to maintain your right of way differently than the traditional way of cutting, because that's what a lot of folks know is an easy task, and it does the job. So finding out a different way to do that. If you go to the next slide. I recently went out there a couple months and met with Donnie and Garcia, which oversees the Friends of Biotech, which are the group that we actually supported, a nonprofit that supports the test. And I was really amazed. The biologist that we bought the seeding from was super excited, because based off of him, he said we were probably 2 years ahead of where we should be. So this was full of bees and butterflies and birds and rabbits, et cetera. It was one of those things I really couldn't really have planned any better. But what this really showed for me internally also, when we're talking about a culture change, is it was a safe and accessible height for the operational activities. Because what we hear in the industry when we talk about doing this work is, well, we can't let vegetation grow in a pipeline because we need to inspect it. It needs to be mowed low, or we could get fined by PHMSA, et cetera. Which having a partnership with API and Dave and his team is helping us see that there's better ways to maintain this. And this is really what that is that, and we wouldn't want to have a height that if someone has to walk in here and go do work, that it'd be too high because of tripping hazards and stuff like that. So it was just a really great spot. This refuge is also going to use the right of way, the center section of the right of way, as a walking trail. It's something that I have a lot of passion about, us having walking trails and biking trails, which, now that we have this industry partnership, I think we're learning from each other that these things can be done and we can work together to have these. Again, this has been really exciting for me, and we're really, my leadership is really excited about us getting these placed in more areas until we get every one of our pipeline systems where we can into it. You go to the next. In this next slide really just kind of shows, you can see off in the distance, these are some of the other pipelines. The right of way on the side was just recently cut, the traditional way of cutting, which was, the tractor goes all the way down and you cut it. A lot of dirt, a lot of dead grass, that as Scott had mentioned, the erosion control, needed to have that topsoil on top of the pipe. Not only is it of course the issue that you have to have cover, we want it protected, but that ends, is a maintenance cost in the future too. If you have areas that ends up seeing erosion, you're going to have to go out and do work on it. So having the right vegetation eliminates a lot of that and helps build on that business case. It was a funny thing that ourselves and TC Energy were the only two companies that wanted to support this project, and TC has a fantastic project on the backside of this. But the pipelines in between did not want to participate. So it's been really great, and I guess we'll use these photos to shamelessly try to include them in it. But this is a great proof point. Go to the next, please. So this slide is something that I get excited about it, but also get a little bit frustrated. When I first started doing some work, or we started doing work on coastal projects and using it, or trying to get the kind of work implemented, is like, how do we make this happen? How do we make sure that it becomes not a one-off project? Because at the time, my very first one was supported as a one-off, somewhat of a social investment kind of project, and we really wanted to see how do we make change. And it's kind of funny now that we talk sustainability and reporting, is, we've really been trying to get this as part of our sustainable way of work. So I've moved the slide back in to keep talking about it, but it's a lot of what we all, both of us talked about earlier, is like having these things in place of what's going to help us get there. How do we take this natural infrastructure, and part of that maintenance practice is having those collaborations, having those innovative partners that has a material or a process that may not be used for industry, and showing them, helping show those opportunities that we can use it in industry. The landowner, Scott mentioned that as one of those things, is being able to really connect with them and understanding their needs. And again, letting them know that we could do it. I've had several conversations with folks that said, hey, look, we wanted to do this kind of work, but we wouldn't even think to ask you because we didn't think that you would want to participate. So this is something to really build off of. The conservation groups are obvious. The state and federal agencies, David mentioned that too, around the policymakers, is learning and having everyone in a region to kind of find out those opportunities. If there's support, if there's money to help academics or conservation groups, et cetera, to look at this work even more and expand it. Having these folks part of it. I have my operations and maintenance staff bolded here because I think this is one of those things us as the industry, just as a internal piece, is also being clear that at all levels need to understand the benefits and the buy-in of it. So it's great for us to have our leadership say, this is what we're going to do. But if that person in the field doesn't see those opportunities or understand it to the point where it makes it successful, you can have the best program in place. It's you're going to have issues. So having those folks involved with it also. The industry partnership, again, this is something I had a couple of years ago, and the folks, our leaders in industry had the foresight to develop the API task force, and this is where we're moving towards. And I have this on a shell piece, and I don't think there's even a shell. We could probably apply this to any industry, that no matter what section you're in, like we're in a midstream, but I have a deep water, I have a downstream group, we have several other entities within Shell, is also explaining those opportunities there, so we all can connect that piece and make this a sustainable ways of working that we do every single day. You go to next. So this is my I'll end in this. This is kind of my I'll go back at my my hearts and minds piece that I talk about. When we first started talking, I started talking about our assets and said we have over 450 people as part of the operations. One of the things that's important to talk about is that these we all live and work in the area. So the communities we talk about are our communities. So that's I always talk about how it's important for us to be able to have those conversations and build those relationships and learn from it. So this is a little something that we put together, by developing a healthy habitat along the right of way, we provide a safe and supportive environment for all wildlife. And then that sustainable habitat also provides a protection and support for our pipelines and our business goals. And in turn, we can provide the revenue to support a community economy in which we work and live in. So this is something, again, about just talking about us as, we talk about the right thing to do. It's right for all of us. So how do we learn from each other? And this is great for us to be able to participate in these kind of things, in the webinars of bringing industry in where they may have not have been before. And I know we'll keep working at it. So again, thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Donnie. Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Dave, for this webinar has been recorded. And if you go to the resources and projects page, there are 2 different ways that you can find the recording once we edit it. Click once more, and you will see this webinar in a week or so, and then the next webinars. Click on once more, and all past webinars. So go through all of those, and we would encourage you to do that. A couple more notes from other participants thanking you all again for your time. So thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thanks.